Are we on the verge of World War III? This is what the internet is saying after a recent incident involving the United States and Iran. This is not the first time in history though that World War III was likely to happen or almost happened, yet it didn't. In this episode of TD Facts, we're looking at 10 surprising times World War III almost happened. So welcome back to another episode. My name is Leroy Kenton, and a question that I have for you before I jump into this episode is, do you think World War III would ever happen? Or do you feel like we learned from the past and it won't ever happen? Or at least not in our lifetime anyways. Sound off down below in the comment section. Starting at number 10, we have the 1979 NORAD computer program mistake. On the morning of November 9th, 1979, technicians at Colorado's North American Aerospace Defense, or NORAD for short, command center were shocked to see their displays light up with the ultimate horror. Oh my god, there was a full-scale nuclear attack that was coming towards the United States. Now, NORAD was to launch 10 interceptor fighter jets and get the president on an escape plane and then prepare to launch a retaliation strike. But before the command center made any sort of decisions and any actions, one technician actually realized that he'd accidentally activated a training program to simulate a Soviet attack. Number 9 brings us the 1983 nuclear false alarm. On September 26, 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was at the Sherpukhov 15 bunker where the Soviets monitored their satellite-based detection systems. Now, shortly after midnight, an alarm sounded signaling that the United States launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles towards Russia. Now, the warning was actually a false alarm, and one of the satellites had read the sun rays hitting clouds as a missile launch. Now, this guy felt that the warning was an error, and he told his superiors that the nuclear strike by the United States wouldn't have 5 missiles. They would have fired hundreds of missiles. Now, with just a few minutes to make a decision, he chose to report as a false alarm, and Petrov received multiple humanitarian awards for this. The Able Archer 83 incident comes in at number 8. So back on November 1983, there was a NATO war game that almost caused the United States and the Soviet Union to start throwing some punches at each other. There was this exercise named Able Archer 83, which was supposed to simulate how conventional attack on Europe by the Soviet Union could eventually be met by a US nuclear strike. So in preparation for the game, the United States, they flew 19,000 troops to Europe and changed the alert status to DEFCON 1 and change the locations of certain command stations, and these actions were typically actions that you would take during wartime. So for the Soviets, they had predictions of how the United States would set up for a nuclear strike, and these movements by the United States matched what the Soviets actually predicted, even though they knew a war game was to take place. But they still went on high alert just in case anything happened out of the ordinary. They stayed set up for a strike until the Able Archer exercise was complete, and later the United States and NATO found out that their simulation of World War III almost led to the real thing happening. Now let's look at the B-59 Submarine incident. There was a minor incident on a Soviet submarine, and it might be one of the closest times the world ever came to seeing a World War III. On October 27, 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States destroyer USS Beale began dropping depth charges on a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine, the B-59, which was near the United States blockade line around Cuba. Now, the charges were non-lethal warning shots that were intended to force the Soviets' B-59 to the surface, but the submarine's captain thought that they were live explosives, and the captain ordered his men to prep their nuclear torpedo for an attack. Vasily Arkhipov, who was second in command, managed to calm down the captain, and the submarine returned to Russia without any incident. Now check this, over 40 years later, it was found out that Vasily Arkhipov did this, and it was a life-changing decision. Number 6 brings us the attack on Yeonpyeong. 10 years ago, North Korea fired dozens of artillery shells at South Korea at the South Korean island of Yeonpyeong. Now sadly, 2 soldiers lost their lives and several other people were injured. Now the United States and other countries really begged South Korea not to fire back, and luckily South Korea listened and they decided to not strike back in a lethal way. Now it's believed that North Korea's motives for the attack was linked to South Korea being upgraded in global status that year, as a small island actually hosted the G20 summit, and it gained international recognition and prestige for focusing its future actions on the global economy. Halfway to number 5, we have the Intruding Bear. So way back in October of 1962, there was a guard in Minnesota at an air base that saw a figure climbing the security fence. Now the guard, he shot at the intruder and set off the sabotage alarm, which automatically set off alarms at the nearby base. But the wrong alarm went off at the Volk Field Air National Guard base that was nearby. Now he sounded the klaxon, which signals a nuclear war and orders nuclear-armed F-106A interceptors to take off. By the time the communication error was identified, the aircraft were already driving down the runway at the airbase to take off. Now there was a car that was driving fast from the command center, and it was able to successfully signal the aircraft to stop, and the intruder in Minnesota turned out to be a bear just wandering around. Next up, we have the US airstrike on Iran. This is the most recent incident, and the United States airstrike ended the life of Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani spearheaded operations in the Middle East, and the end to his life really marks a major escalation in the tensions between the United States and Iran. And yeah, could this event really be a defining moment for the Middle East and the United States' role that they play in it? A significant Iranian retaliation is expected, and this could lead to a cycle of actions and reactions from both countries, Iran and the US, and the conflict could continue to escalate. Iran's response might be against US military interests in the Middle East, but it could also be against any United States related target that Iran thinks is like, yeah, you know what? That thing right there is vulnerable, so we're going after it. Iran does not have any nuclear weapons program, and although it does maintain that the program doesn't exist and they're not interested in building a nuclear weapon, frustrations with the United States could cause Iran to abandon this nuclear agreement and pursue creating their own nuclear weapons. Alright, at number 3 we have the 1995 research rocket incident. In the morning of January 25th, 1995, a Norwegian-US joint research rocket, the Black Grant 12, lifted off from an island near Norway. A minute and a half after the launch, the rocket exploded upwards, and it fired itself as well as its payload even higher into the air. Now the rocket, which was designed to study the Aurora Borealis, wound up as a whole different kind of experiment instead. This was a test of US-Russian relations, so they say anyways. Because I mean, the Cold War was barely over. When they saw the rocket, Russian radar operators sent an alert to Moscow. Shortly after, the Russian President Boris Yeltsin was brought his Black Nuclear Command suitcase, and he conferred with the defense minister by telephone for several moments until he learned of the rocket's actual intent. Now only 2 more left. At number 2 we have the Accidental Emergency System Broadcast. In 1971, during the Vietnam War, America's emergency broadcast system went off at 9:33 a.m. on February 20th. Now it was reported, however, that a teletype operator fed the incorrect punch tape into the transmitter before a routine test. This sent out an emergency message to 5,000 radio stations and 800 TV stations across America. For about 40 minutes after that, regular programming was paused, and people were waiting, as well as broadcasters were waiting, for a message from the White House. But no message ever came. And the thing is that the radio and the TV stations didn't even know the correct protocol to follow, even if they were to get a message. Some stations couldn't find their verification codes that emergency was actually in effect, and others simply couldn't even find the list of emergency codes. So some stations even failed to receive the alert on its own. So that really exposed how unprepared the US media was, and now they were able to fill in the gaps in case an actual alert did happen. The media now knows exactly what to do. And finally, number 1, we have the U-2 spy plane incident. On October 27th, 1962, just as the Cuban Missile Crisis was at its peak, there was an American U-2 spy plane that took off from Alaska to conduct a routine reconnaissance mission near the North Pole. The pilot, whose name was Charles Maltby, was supposed to use celestial navigation to find his way, but halfway through the trip, his view became really obstructed due to the northern lights in the sky, and he ended up drifting far off course and crossed into Soviet Union airspace. So of course, the Soviets were worried that this U-2 aircraft could be a nuclear nuclear bomber, and the Soviets prepped several MiG fighter jets and sent them on course to destroy the U-2 aircraft. The United States responded by sending 2 nuclear-armed F-102 fighters to guide Charles Maltby back to Alaska. Now, Charles Maltby managed to steer his U-2 aircraft out of the Soviet airspace before it was intercepted. Now, the following day, the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And yeah, it probably wouldn't have happened if this jet was intercepted. Alright guys, so that's all I have for you in this episode. Those were 10 times that World War III almost happened. Let me know, do you know of any other incidents? Sound off in the comment section down below. And also, yeah, the question that I asked at the beginning of the video, do you think that World War III will happen in our lifetime? Or will it never happen? I don't know. Sound off down below. Now before you head out, here's another related video. Tap the annotation right here. It'll take you straight to it. Also, my social media links are below in the video description, as well as some other good stuff. So have fun down there. And if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell notification. That way you can join the FTD Facts family and keep up to date with our daily episodes. Okay guys, it was great hanging out with you in this episode. Can't wait to see you in the next one.